Distinguished guests, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to start by thanking you all for being here today, taking the time out of your day to watch my seminar, what I call Volume 1 of Amerikkkan Korruption. We're talking to you all about Slavery 1.5, the Untold Truths of Debt Peonage. Pretty recently, in late June, I read this article about this white couple. They had adopted 5 vulnerable black youths into their care, aged 6 to 16. While this might sound like a good story, a story of integration, however, it was used for infiltration. In fact, this couple used each and every one of them, even the 6-year-old, for slave labor. And this happened this year. And they adopted white children as well, but they did not make them to be slaves, only the black ones on their West Virginian plantation. They were locked in bonds with no way out. When the sheriff's department investigated, they said that they found, quote, the children had no means to exit the barn on their own, no running water, no bathroom facilities, and were obviously deprived of adequate hygienic care and food. They were kept there for upwards of 8 years, according to the defense. I believe this should be marked as nothing less than a national tragedy. Having such a miscarriage of justice carried out under our very noses in our very own home. But it does do one positive thing. It poses a very interesting question in the way of progress. We often would like to herald progress as being in our society and so across civilizations. We have champions of progress, so we progress forward. For God's sakes, progressives are called progressives from the word progress. I would like to offer a rebuttal to that notion. We must separate the word change from progress, because we are simply at the stage of change. Change implies that it's different. It can go from bad to less bad. It can go from bad to a different kind of bad, and it can even go from bad to worse. Progress, however, implies that it is now good. It means that it goes from bad to good or medium to good. Just as Malcolm X said, quote, if someone stabbed you in the back with a 9-inch knife and pulls it up 3 inches, you wouldn't call that progress, would you? The knife is still in your back. It's not progress if you take that knife out and try to heal the wound. Then you're at progress. Then you're starting to progress forward. And only then have you progressed. And many of us won't even like to admit the knife is even in our backs, because we have been systematically taught that it is not there. We've been taught this post-racism idea that racism is gone and that slavery has been done away with hundreds of years ago. So I believe it is so important to talk about this information, because we must fight this disinformation. We must speak on yesterday so we can understand how we get to today and understand where we need to go tomorrow. Just as you can't understand a great book by simply reading the last 3 chapters, you can't understand time or history by just looking at the last few decades. You can't appreciate a great painting by just looking at it through a keyhole. And you can't understand our current prison slavery system by looking through that same keyhole, by being taught through that same keyhole. And that is the reason why. There is a reason why this is so. Because this is all a distraction. It's a distraction to just learn about the era of Jim Crow and to learn about the era of segregation. We all know about Jim Crow and the era of segregation, don't we? And that's what's taught, because that is what's palatable. It's a lot more palatable to say that the past was about separate water fountains or separate bathroom facilities than it is to say the past was slavery. One is a lot harder to accept than the other. So we're in the era of something far different. And as I pose this question, I must then give an answer, shouldn't I? And I think we all know what that answer is based on Tyler's presentation. I am talking about the era of debt peonage, a situation which has been marked as, quote, a condition worse than slavery. And I promise that by the end of this presentation, I can prove without a shadow of a reasonable doubt that progress is not here. The progress has not come. And I'll be showing why progress has not come by showing the experiences of them. And while I do this, I want you to all just think about in the back of your heads. Think about, would you be able to tell if these cases took place in the early 20th century, or if they took place during the antebellum slavery time, antebellum meaning in the South pre-Civil War? Would you be able to tell the difference? It was just a few details removed. And I will be sharing some of the details details as well. I'll be sharing the details that we are not taught about in schools, the parts that make people uncomfortable, the parts that could bring upon real change. Now, before I start, I'd like to give a warning to you all. I will be speaking briefly, however, we'll be speaking on sexual assault. I will also give a warning for when I get to that, but I figure I should advance a warning. I will also likely be swearing throughout this a little bit, as well as just a warning for some of the words which humanity has to offer. With that out of the way, here we go. I'd like to start by defining the word slavery through this presentation. I define it as holding someone under involuntary servitude, which they're not paid, or having a complete abandonment in bringing humanity in others. Now that we have a common ground, let's start with our first example, John Davis. He was a man, he just got off the train to see his sick wife when he was approached by a man named Robert Franklin, who approached him saying, "Hey, have you got any money?" Davis responded with, "I have some, but not for you." The constable asked him again, "When are you going to pay me the money you owe me?" Davis responded with, "I don't owe you anything." A short standoff ensued in which none of them exchanged words. For Davis broke the silence, telling him very frankly, "You can either arrest me, or I'm not giving you a dime." This stunned the constable, not expecting such a rebuttal, so he backed off. A few hours later, after he'd been reunited with his wife, Frances M. Pruitt came with a warrant, saying that, "I need you to come with me. I have a warrant for your arrest." Davis asked to see this warrant, but he would not supply it. Davis knew what would happen if he went, but he also knew what would happen if he didn't come, if he didn't comply. Quote, "If necessary, he would simply submit to whatever the white man demanded." It was a dance every black man in the South was being forced to learn, because to resist only invited far worse. And some of these far worse can be seen in these next examples. Let's look at Cornelia Hammock. She was a woman who pled innocent to charges. The charges we do not know, and the courts also did not know. She was sentenced to 18 months sentenced to 18 months hard labor. This woman died after 2 days. 2 days of work she took. That's all it took for her to die. What kind of barbaric work could they have been doing to make her die? What I think is even more tragic is, what if she had kids? What if she told her kids before they went to bed, "I'll see you tomorrow morning"? What if she let them go on the bus to school and she never came back? That never came through. They waited at the door every single day for the rest of their lives, wondering, "What happened to my mom? Why did my mom leave me?" Because almost never were they able to tell the families what happened. There weren't phones to tell the families that I'm here now, to ask them for help. There was no way for them to know. What if they had a partner? And they wondered to themselves every single day, "What was so wrong with me that you would leave without a voice notice?" What if she had parents? Her parents would wonder every single day what happened to her little baby girl. And this happened to children as well. This next case is of Archer and Q.F. Lewis, 2 boys named age 12 and 10. And that is all. We know no more information other than that. We know their names, we know their ages, we can infer their sex, and we can also infer their race. That is it. We have no more information about these kids who were stolen and sent into abject slavery. What again if they were taken directly from their mother's arms? What if they were just playing on the streets, as brothers do, and taken into slavery, just sold into servitude? We do not know. And not every one of these people even have the dignity of being allowed their names anymore. These next 3 people have had their names stricken from them from time. The first man, he was walking home with his wife and child, where he was stopped by an officer over a petty offense. The man had a gun on him, which was surprisingly legal during this time. The officer saw this gun and opened fire on the man, killing him in front of his wife and daughter. He did nothing wrong. All he did was simply exist and was shot dead without a moment's hesitation. The next man, he was accused of stealing, complied with the officers, yes, was still killed in front of crowds of people. They did nothing wrong except for exist. All they did was be black, and that was enough for them to die. The next woman, before I get to that, I think we can all agree that these are simply lynchings. Wouldn't we all agree? Wouldn't you agree that this is just a lynching? Wouldn't you? I'm talking about hidden history, but I think it's necessary to learn the details as well. We must learn just how little it took for them to get lynched. We need to learn about Tulsa, Oklahoma, how they simply had a man trip and fall, and the entire town was razed to hell over the course of 2 days. We need to learn that a man was simply walking home, and then he was killed for existing. We must also hear the details of slavery. This next case is even more daunting. It started with her father, who could not read and was coercing the Senator contract to sell their land over to the new white owners. This forced them to live as peons, forced there by what was essentially a fugitive slave act, because during this time in the South, if you were either advanced your payment beforehand, such as just giving payment for a work where you do it, or had a debt paid off, you were not allowed to leave, and if you did, they could come and get you, just as they could during the fugitive slave times, and they were forced as well by whips and chains. Here, before I get into the next part, I will give the trigger warning for sexual assault. It's very dark, but I believe very, very vital to know. This woman, this little girl, this baby, was raped starting at the age of just 5 years old by, quote, whatever men were present. She was raped starting at 5 years old, and she was told that if she told her dad, he would be dead before sunrise. They were given no pay, forced to do free work, because, quote, they beat us. They didn't feed us. We had to go drink water out of the creek, and to survive eating leftovers and wild animals, quote. They treated the dogs a whole lot better than they treated us, because in this system, slaves, black people were not people. They were not even animals. They were tools. They were hammers. Slaves during this pre-Civil War era were treated more like cattle or horses. You don't often care about them on an emotional level, but they're expensive. It's an investment. If you work it till it dies, you lose a lot of money. So you're going to pace it. A hammer, however, you don't care what happens to it. You can work it and work it and work it until it dies or it breaks. And if it does, you can always just get another because it's cheap. There's no investment in money. That is why it was worse. That was why the experiences were even worse. And the courts agreed with this. The courts agreed that these were actually cases of slavery. They said that this was not a case of peonage, but a case of slavery. But how did this system work? How did debt peonage work? How did they get these people in these positions? For that, I believe it is best and most simplest to put it into what I call a black enslavement flowchart or a pipeline. You start with the slave catcher. This could be practically anyone. It could be a police officer. It could be a bounty hunter. It could be a constable. It could even be a justice of the peace. And as it could be a justice of the peace, it could be practically anyone. It could be a mechanic. It could be a tavern keeper. It could be a drunk who believes he invented the X-ray. It did not matter how ill-fitted they were for this position. They could have this power to enslave people. And the next step, they saw a black person they want, or even better, were sent directly after this person by one of the owners. And once they approached them, they would arrest, or more aptly, kidnap them. Once they did that, they would bring them to a court and sentence them. There's a reason I did not segment these two things. I did not read a single case, not one, where someone was brought to one of these courts and not sentenced. It just didn't happen. It simply does not happen. Now, just for a quick recap, you would have someone, who could be anyone, see a black person, kidnap them, then sentence them, all in the course of a day, very easily, in the course of a few hours. This whole thing could be done in hours. This is where, however, it does diverge slightly. It could go into one of two systems. It could go into either the convict leasing chain gang system, which I would bet all of us here know what that means, or to the debt peonage system. The best way to describe the difference is here, you are sentenced by the court, now owned by the state, and leased to a private entity. Peonage, however, you were convicted by the court and then bought from the court to the individual. You completely cut the government out of it and cut the middleman out. Now you can just directly buy them instead of having to lease them. The reason I say buy is because they would pay off these quote-unquote debts. They would often have these debts placed upon them because they would often have everyone in this system be paid off. They could have the slave catcher be on payroll to the owner, have the one they get sentenced to also on payroll to the owner, and then this debt they pay off does not exist. The debt they paid off is for the crime which they themselves convicted the person of having. They themselves accused them of having. And sometimes they would even skip these trial courts anyways. They would just have these things all on site. They would have a judge of the peace on site and arrest and convict them there and then. That is why it was the most exploitable. That is why it was the most direct line into servitude. That is why it was the best to invest in. And once they did this, they would then force a labor contract. I will give the example of John Davis's, but they were all relatively the same. You would consent to, quote, be locked up in a cell at night, and should, quote, Pace advance me anything over and above what he's already furnished me, I agree to work for him under this contract until it paid in full. And the worst of all, the most dastardly of all of them, quote, Pace is hereby authorized to hire me out to any person, firm, or corporation in the state of Alabama. What this means, in simple terms, is that they could sell you. They could buy you from the courts, a court which they may own, and then sell you to someone else. They get the free labor from you, and then they sell you for even more money. They could also whip these people because they had to, quote unquote, consent to them. The author said, quote, in always been named Pace owned Davis. You could even be born into this system. You could be born as a peon. You could be born as an enslaved person. It was all theatrics. The only difference from what we consider traditional antebellum pre-Civil War slavery was theatrics. That was all. So now it is time that I cut my own theatrics. I have been lying to you all throughout this entire presentation. But for me to explain that, I must first go back to these three names. You all know these two names. I can say that with a 100% certainty. This one, likely none of you do, because her name has been buried so expertly, but she should be known by all as she is an American hero in every single way that you could possibly be. Her name was Mae Louise Walls Miller. She's the woman the little girl I talked about that was raped at the age of 5 years old, and she was born in 1943. She was enslaved for 18 years. She was raped for 13 years straight. She tried to run away. She tried to escape, but she was told they couldn't because, quote, they'll kill us. She started running at the age of 9. Quote, what could you run to? We thought everybody was in the same predicament in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. So she was, after 18 years, however, she was just fed up. She refused to anymore. In 1961, her heart helped sneak them away. She remembered saying, quote, I remember thinking, they're just going to have to kill me today. So I'm just done. I'm not doing this anymore. She was fed up and finally got freedom. The reason she was allowed to be under this for so long is because the whites had that much freedom. Quote, the sheriff, the constable, all of them worked together. So peons had no outlet to talk to anyone under peonage. The white people in here, the enslavers, had so much power that when the federal government looked to pursue this in 1903, even they couldn't do anything to stop it because they could not get anyone to talk about what they went through because they had that much power. The federal government couldn't, or they wouldn't do anything to stop it, even though they knew about this. They've known about this for decades. So I must ask now, did emancipation even come? A woman was held in abject slavery. How is this not slavery? She was forced to work day after day and violated for over a decade straight. This is slavery. And she only found out in 2001. Quote, as a matter of fact, I thought everybody was living that way. It took 136 years for emancipation to reach certain individuals. 136 years. When she did find out, she looked to fight it back. In 2003, she and her 6 siblings joined a lawsuit for reparations. In 2004, the judge dropped they dropped the charges. They dropped the case. They wouldn't do anything about it. And this woman She died August 24th, 2014. Each and every single one of the people in this room were alive during the same time period as a woman held in abject slavery in America, legally affirmed by the United States of America. And I say legally affirmed because they did nothing to make up for it. There was no reparations given. They wouldn't give reparations for someone who was held in slavery and still alive. They wouldn't so much as condemn the people who did it. They did nothing. They refused to put their money where their mouth was. So how did they not say it was okay? Now, these next two that I talked about, I said that you would all know these people, and you do, because they all lived in the same state as you. The first man who was walking home, had a gun on him, and was killed in front of his wife and daughter. His name was Philando Castile. The next man, the man who complied with the officer and was killed in front of crowds of people, was named George Floyd. We all agreed before that these were just lynchings. How is it possible that I could sneak George Floyd, a man who died less than 5 years ago in these twin cities, less than 10 miles away from us? Anyone know why? Because it hasn't changed. The changes are indistinguishable because it is indistinguishable from these old systems. It is not different. The dehumanization is not gone. It has barely even changed forms because there has been no progress. And we can see this through the experience and just how similar they are and have stayed throughout the decades. So now what? What do we do now? What do we do faced with the idea that nothing has changed and we are still held in such horrible conditions? What do we do in response to a vast network of corruption, which has taken the lives of millions and millions and will take the lives of millions and millions more if we do not stop it? We must first understand this enemy and system in order to dismantle it by education, which we're all doing right now, by listening to the past, by learning what they have done and what they continue to do. We must also remember who it's for. We must remember that it's for May Louise Walsmiller. It's for Philando Castile. It's for George Floyd, Hazel Slaughter, John Davis, No Turk, and Khalif Browder. It is for all these people who have lost their lives. Because if we don't fight, we'll be forced to tell future generations what we did to help end it. Will we tell them that we were on the sidelines, simply saying, I agree, slavery is bad, but nothing more than lip service? Will we just be there idly while other people do the work that must be done? Or are we going to say that we stood up for it? Or are we going to say that we stood up to help end this multi-generational fight, which is not even close to ending any time in this nation's lifetime? In 1865, people thought it was hallelujah. People thought it was over. Fight done. They all packed it up. Almost every single anti-slavery society disbanded by this time because they thought it was done. But it's not even close to being over. Each day, more people lose their freedom. More children lose their parents. More fathers, more mothers lose their little babies. More people get forced into this system of subservience. We cannot pack up like they did in the past. We must go further, and we must accomplish this by giving reparations, by making up for what has happened, by actually putting our money where our mouth is, putting our time where our mouth is. We must accomplish this by any means necessary to stomp this system out. Because then, and only then, can this end. If we can all come together, then it will truly take a nation of millions to hold us back. If they want to stop the people from ending this misjustice, if they want to stop we the people from saying this is wrong, we will not stand by this any longer. It will take. Because if we the people do not stop it, then we the people will also be forced under this system. Just as Martin Luther King Jr. said, quote, if no one is free until we are all free. Because of that, none of us are free. We are not free as long as there are people held in these circumstances. We must win. We must. Or else we will all be forced to this. Otherwise, we will all be doomed. Real. I'd like to thank you all for attending my seminar, Volume 1 of Amerikkkan Korruption. Thank you all for your time.